All right, so today we're going to talk about the Articles of Confederation. Again, this was after the Declaration of Independence and the Revolutionary War. The new colonists had to find some type of government to, be able to govern their new society. So the Articles were approved in 1777. Again, the Declaration of Independence was in 1776. It needs all 13 states to ratify. That means to approve any agreements or anything. Again, that's all 13. That's pretty tough to do on a normal basis. 11 did this in the first year, and then Delaware and Maryland were the last two in 1781. So the big part I need you to know here on this is that all 13 states need to ratify, what ratify is, and that on March 1st, 1781, the Articles of Confederation become effective after Maryland passes it as well. So we have a new government. So what does our new government look like? Well, first thing is unicameral. Unicameral means one house. Okay, the word una means one. The cameral, unicameral, one house. So we had one house that was going to govern our nation. Another structure here was important was one state equaled one vote. Okay, so this is no matter how big or how small your state is, you had one vote. So Virginia had one vote. Rhode Island had one vote. It might cause some controversy here with some states here in the future. The president of the Congress was only that of the Congress, not of the United States. Civil officers were appointed, such as the Postmaster General, were appointed by Congress. There's no judicial or executive branch. Obviously, with the only being one house, you have no judicial, no executive branch. You just have the Congress. And so that's kind of the structure of it, basically. Big part there, unicameral, and no executive, no judicial branch. They did have some powers, this Congress. They could make war and peace. Okay, so they could declare war on other countries. They could coin money. They could borrow money. Now, we'll talk here a little bit about the weaknesses about where they're borrowing money from, but they could borrow money. They could conduct foreign relations. That means they could deal with foreign governments, and they could bring ambassadors to the United States. We could send ambassadors to other nations as well. As you just said there, send and receive ambassadors. We could build a navy. Without doubt, protect our waters, our borders, and fix weights and measurements. That's like the inches and pounds. So we had the right to do that. So they didn't have a lot of powers. It was pretty much an idea that they didn't want the Congress to have a lot of powers. They wanted to have the states have powers. Remember, they just broke away from a tyrant in King George where he had all the power. And the central government had all the power in England. So these colonists decided that they don't want the power to be in one central government. They want it to be spread out, and they spread it out between all the states. So that means we have some weaknesses. So weaknesses we have, the first one, there's no power to tax. They couldn't tax anybody. They couldn't raise a revenue to pay for things because they weren't allowed to tax. One of the things that they had problems with the government in England was no taxation without representation. They were getting taxed heavily from England, and they were not having representatives in the England government, so therefore they were feeling that they shouldn't have power to tax here in the new government. So they had to raise money by asking states for funds. So I talked about this earlier about borrowing. They had to basically ask each state if they could have these funds to do certain things. So it's a pretty interesting thing. I look at this as basically as the kids, the states, asking the parents, the federal government, for funds. Could you imagine asking your parents asking you for your funds, for your money, to be able to do certain things? So that's a problem. Definitely, it's a weakness for the Articles. No regulation of interstate trade. Okay, so they could decide how to trade amongst one another. So Virginia could sell its tobacco to Rhode Island at one price and then sell it to New York at a different price. So there's no regulation by the federal government with that. It's just basically each state's going to do their own. The Congress could not make anyone obey laws. They had no power to make anybody obey the laws. And this was a big problem because people would just basically say, nah, we're not obeying that law. And Congress had no judicial branch to put any fear in them and to make them obey any laws. To amend the articles, to change them, took 13 votes. That's 13 states. They all had to vote the same way. Very, very difficult. I always talk about this with seniors saying, if we all had to have unanimous vote for the class flower or class colors or class quote, everybody at some point somebody's got a problem with it, and it's very hard to do that. So to amend the articles, taking 13 votes was extremely difficult. Again, no executive branch. That's a weakness. No national court system. So again, no judges, no judicial system, no court system to not help them make and obey anybody's laws. Another problem, 2/3 of states needed to approve legislation. So this is when a legislation basically is a law or a bill that they want to get passed. 2/3 of states had to approve it. So that's 9 out of 13. Most time we have to just think about simple majority. 7 out of 13 would pass a law. Now in this Articles of Confederation, it was 9 out of 13 states had to approve the legislation. So again, very, very difficult to do that. So with that, I think we'll stop there with the structures and powers and weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask.